Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone Season 5, Episode 4. It's called A Kind of a Stopwatch. So spoilers for the episode. This episode is about a stopwatch that can stop time. And a character named McNulty gets his hands on it after a fairly hefty introduction. It's quite a big part of the episode, is introducing who this character is and just how much everyone hates him. Pretty much. He never shuts up. He never stops talking. He refers to himself in the third person, and he's always saying that he has the best ideas for everything. I mean, the opening of the episode is him saying that he's been putting suggestions in the suggestion box at work for 11 months, and the boss finally wants to see him, so he's bragging. He thinks he's about to be praised for all of his great ideas, and he ends up getting fired because he's been putting suggestions in the box for 11 months. And we find out that none of them had anything to do with the place he worked in. It sounds like it's a women's underwear company that he works for, and all of his suggestions are about other things. They're about hot dogs, or tinned food, or the military spending, or something. Like it was a bunch of variety of things, none of which were about the actual job that he worked at. So his boss fires him, and that kind of sets off the episode. This reminded me a lot in some ways of Time Enough at Last, particularly the ending. The ending felt like it was a kind of similar idea to the glasses breaking at the end of that episode, because this episode, once he gets the stopwatch and he starts pausing time and he does whatever he wants, he eventually, it all builds up to him going to a bank to steal all the money. And he goes in, he pauses, luckily the vault was open, but I guess he timed it that way, and he just walks out with this trolley of money, and the end of the episode is that the watch falls on the ground and cracks whilst everything's frozen. The ironic sort of ending to the episode is that now everything will be frozen forever, and he's going around the various locations, his workplace, the bar that we see multiple times in the episode, and he's begging people to unfreeze. He really wants people to thingy. Obviously, I'm not saying it's exactly like that episode. It just reminded me a lot of that episode. Maybe it's just because he drops something and it cracks. Maybe that's all it is. But he's now trapped in a world where he can't do what he wanted to do. His entire goal throughout the episode is he wants people to like him. He wants to be a big shot in front of everyone. And the endings kind of brings it all home. Because I was watching this episode, and the ad break is especially late in this episode. It was a 25-minute episode. And when the ad break happens, there's only like 7 or 8 minutes left. It's quite late. He doesn't really start using the watch like aggressively until around that part of the story. So I was wondering if this was going to be one where they wrap it up too quickly, and I actually don't think they do. I think the ending they have was perfectly paced with the time they had left in the episode. I just didn't know what the ending was going to be. I thought surely he's going to try and do more stuff with this watch, but it made its point very well. The idea being that he never lets anyone talk, and everyone hates him because he's always going on about something. They don't let those guys at the bar who complain they're trying to watch the baseball game and he won't shut up, bringing up useless facts and ruining the experience. Effectively, because he never lets anyone talk, they might as well be frozen, right? They might as well just be paused and for him to say whatever he wants to say. And then the ironic ending being that he's literally in that world where everyone's paused, no one will ever respond to him, and he can talk for as long as he wants, but no one's ever going to say anything back to him. So that's kind of what the episode is doing. And in that sense, I think the ending is quite solid. Like, I thought this was a fun little episode. I think Richard Erdman, who plays McNulty, who I didn't realize this when I was watching it, but I clicked on the actor. He plays Leonard in Community. So I've actually seen this actor in something much, much later in his life. He passed away in 2019, but when Community was on up until 2015, he was in that show as a recurring character. So that's just a weird, like, oh shit, okay, this is this guy like 50, 60 years ago. I think the episode's a solid one. I think Twilight Zone can be a little hit and miss, especially when it comes to light-hearted episodes or episodes that are veering towards comedy. I wouldn't say this is a comedy episode per se, but it's definitely a lighter episode with a character who feels more animated, right? He's very kind of over the top with the way he's aggressively talking at everyone. The performance by Erdman's is pretty solid. Like, you get exactly who this guy is very, very quickly. But I think it works because the hijinks of the episode of him freezing time and messing around with stuff is mostly pretty fun, and I think part of that is because while the show's had trouble before of doing this, I thought they did a really good job here of whenever the actors had to act frozen and stay still. Like, I was really looking for the shaking, and I could see it a little bit occasionally, but it was much, much better than previous examples. Obviously, they do also, if Erdman, if McNulty's not in the shot with the actors, it will just be a freeze frame. And you can tell. I mean, and it's just one of those things where you can just tell when it's a paused freeze frame versus it's live it's recording and playing back, but they're just acting frozen. It just looks different, and you can tell. But I thought that was a wise move, to be honest. The more you can just do it with actually freezing the image, the better, the effect might ultimately end up being. I also did a couple of other little things in terms of how they presented it, where the music always changed whenever he froze time. So it felt like a really sort of kind of light-hearted, jazzy number when time was moving forward, and then he'd hit the button, and then this kind of more almost I wouldn't say tense, but like more of a ticking kind of suspenseful music would come in as the time was frozen, and he was getting up to hijinks, whether it was stealing a donut from the little coffee car, or he was messing with someone's hair. It would change the time, and right from the first moments he's using the watch, when he's like testing it with his fish, he does it by accident first in the bar with the bartender, but when he's testing it later on with the fish, it does that every single time. And they also go one step further by when he does realize that it's happening, because he sort of thinks he's just drunk and he goes to bed. When he wakes up the next day and he tests it again by looking out the window, they get some stock footage of like a busy street in New York or wherever, and they pause that footage, and I'm like, okay, that's smart. It adds a lot of production value because it looks like they shot this big busy street in New York. But then they kind of couldn't help themselves by just saying, hey, well, if the entire world's pausing, we'll do a montage of all these other things that are pausing whenever he stops the watch. So we get this really absurd, like 30 seconds or so of just stock footage of different things, of a plane crashing into a house, of horse racing, of like a military march, of other busy streets, and it's just them all freezing and then unpausing, and that's like a montage. I probably could have done without that. That felt like it was just them milking that they could use some stock footage and get away with it. But by and large, I thought it was a pretty entertaining character. I thought you understood why everyone was annoyed at him. I think the running gag that the bartender's really upset because he always drives away his customers. He keeps talking during the baseball game, and eventually everyone leaves, and he complains that he always does this, and then he does it again. The character, he thinks he's really smart, but he's not that bright. Like, it takes him a little bit too long to realize, because he comes into the bar and says, hey, I've got this stopwatch, and it freezes time, and it's great. Watch this. And he freezes time, and he goes around, and he drinks a couple other drinks, and he messes up one guy's hair. He unfreezes time, and then he only just realizes, oh yeah, to them, they didn't see anything because time was frozen. So they don't even think I did anything. It felt like a weird detail that he didn't realize that till that point, and that he didn't do more so that they would see a change when time unfroze. Because earlier in the same story, earlier with the bartender, the first time he uses a stopwatch, he actually walks across the room, and when he unfreezes time, he's behind the bartender. So the end of that scene's really good, because the bartender, from his perspective, McNulty's teleported across the room, and it kind of feels like, why don't you just stand somewhere else so it looked like you jumped a distance or something? So it feels like, he goes through a couple of ideas. Like, he wants to try and sell it as a product to his boss that fired him, and obviously that doesn't go very well. He basically gets kicked out. But he then thinks, oh, people like people who have a lot of money, so that's why he decides to go rob the bank. And it's when he's just casually going out the bank with this big trolley of money that he smashes the watch and everything comes to an end. Or actually, it doesn't. It freezes in time forever is maybe a better way of putting it. And it's his kind of sad ending. He got, in a way, what he was always wanting, or at the very least what he was actually doing to the world. He kind of made it permanent, and that's kind of the sad ending. But he goes to his office where he worked, Another nice touch here is that they had like someone throwing out a bit of paper into the trash, and they had it kind of probably on a string or something like that, but it was sort of there in the foreground as he was walking around, and it was a really nice touch of just a little bit of like, hey, something suspended in midair. It's not just people standing still. And they even do a little payoff here because he was trying to ask the secretary out on a date at the start of the episode, and it's another example early on of no one likes him, and she's like, no, never, not in a million years. And at the end of the episode, when he's going around when everyone's frozen, he opens the manager's door, and she's in there kissing the manager. So that didn't really need to have a payoff, but it was a nice little payoff that she was already in a relationship with the manager. So, that's fun stuff. I mean, I think you could critique it and say they could have done more with this premise with him affecting more things. He tells a story at one point that he went to a baseball game and he froze time and moved the base 10 feet so that the runner would be safe, which I feel like someone would notice that it moved. But it's one of those little things where it's fun to hear about that, but obviously they can't just go and shoot that, right? They don't have the budget to shoot in a baseball stadium with a crowd, like there's an actual game going on and all the rest of it. So you kind of feel the limitations there a little bit, I suppose. But that didn't bother me too much. It was nice to know he was doing these bigger things in these bigger situations, because obviously most of the scenes take place in one of three locations. They're, the bar, the work, maybe his apartment, and then finally the bank is the last location we get in the episode. But I think for what the episode was actually trying to do in terms of its story, about telling the story about this guy who basically just keeps running with his mouth and keeps going like no one else exists, like everyone else is frozen in time anyway, and then giving him that ending where everyone is literally now frozen in time and he's now begging for them to start talking back to him, like he's desperate for that. In terms of telling that story, I think it does what it needs to do. I think it sets up those beats, it sets up this character, and I think the ending for the stories is perfect. Like, if this had been an episode in season 4, you probably could have done another 20 or so minutes of him just messing with different types of thing and trying to, make money different ways, or stealing different things, or just having more fun with it. I'm not saying that this episode feels too short or it needs that for its point to work. I think if anything, I'm saying I could see how you could fill the rest of that time if it was a double length episode, but at the same time, I think what they chose to include in the episode was everything they needed to tell the story of this character, and why the ending feels like a comeuppance feels a bit strong of a word, but it's kind of a comeuppance in a weird way. And the episode also does a good job of showing you what type of person he is, on top of like all the constant talking and not caring about what anyone else says. It's brought up that he never really tips the bartender or even orders a more expensive drink, which is fine if he just likes the beer, but he doesn't seemingly tip. The bartender complains about that. The fact that he does just steal a donut and doesn't care, about the fact that he's stealing. And I get that the temptation to do this would be quite large if you had this power. Like, I understand that. I absolutely do. But I think it's really setting up throughout the episode, like, that he is this person who is kind of self-centered. He is the center of his own world. He doesn't really consider what anyone else likes, cares, or wants, and never shuts up, is part of that larger picture of how he interacts with the world. So I think all of these little things throughout just enhance that he kind of deserves something at the end to sort of learn a lesson. Yeah, I think A Kind of Stopwatch is a pretty decently entertaining episode. I think the lead performance is good. I think the premise is solid enough. It went in really quickly, and I think the ending, and in particular, is quite solid for selling what it is. And again, credit for the actors pretending to be frozen still. At one point, he goes into his manager's office. This is in the middle of the episode when he's trying to sell him the stopwatch, and he's basically told to get lost, and the secretary's even going to phone the police. He freezes time, and he walks back into the manager's office and just puts like a rose in his pocket, and he tickles him with some like straw from the plant or the sort of the display that's nearby. And the actor does a good job of staying still even when he's been tickled in the neck. So, and obviously they're freaked out when time unfreezes and he's got all this stuff on him all of a sudden. There's definitely like larger things you could do with this concept, but as a tight story, just telling the story of this character and what it is doing for his story and what it represents and the way he treats the world around him and how, oh, now he's actually going to have to live in that forever. I think it nails what it's trying to do, and I had a good time with it. So after obviously the classic episode that was last week, and it was that very tense, serious episode, this was kind of a nice lighter one to follow that up with, but still relatively good quality. So kind of a stopwatch. I think is a decent time. I would recommend this one. The next one's called The Last Night of a Jockey, and Rod Serling was very excited to tell us about Mickey Rooney being in this episode, and he's the only actor in this episode, and I can confirm looking at the IMDb page that it's just Mickey Rooney and Rod Serling. Rod obviously just being there for his intro and outro. So the description on IMDb is: a washed up jockey gets his wish while waiting for the results of his race fixing hearing. Interesting. Let me know what you thought of a kind of stopwatch in the comments. You can like and subscribe and all that stuff. It helps out a lot if you do. And of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses, including bonuses for all the movie podcasts that we do over at MailFuzz Movies. For TV, I do an exclusive monthly review of Columbo. Episode 3 is, I think, going out later this week, if I remember correctly. So if that sounds of interest, you can get that as a bonus if you support everything over on Patreon. But thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.